Welcome to Life Partner by Casey Lee. This is The Dating Files, a series that examines real relationship dynamics with honesty and care. She replayed it often in the days that followed, not obsessively because she had enough self-awareness to notice when she was in a loop and pull herself out of it, but consistently, in quiet moments when her mind wasn't occupied with something else. She would go back through the last few weeks, looking for the moment she should have seen it coming, looking for the sign that she had missed. His name was Thomas. They had been seeing each other for about 2 months. Not a long time, but long enough that she had stopped treating it as purely exploratory. Long enough that when he called one evening and said, simply without much preamble, that he didn't think this was going in the right direction for him. She hadn't had a framework ready for that information. She thought things were going well. Not perfectly, she wasn't naive about that. There had been a week where he had been quieter than usual, which she had attributed to a stressful period at work because he had mentioned something about a project deadline. There had been a couple of evenings where the energy had felt slightly flat by the end. But that happened in any dynamic, and she hadn't read it as meaningful. There had been no dramatic shift, no clear turning point, no moment she could isolate afterward as the thing that she should have recognized. And that was what made it so disorienting. Not the ending itself. She had relationships end before, and she knew how to move through that. It was more so the absence of the warning. The gap between what she had been experiencing and what had apparently been happening for him. She spent some time in the question of what she had missed. And this is where it got complicated because the honest answer was maybe not very much. When she went back through the preceding weeks looking for the signal, she found things that could be read as signals if you were looking for them retrospectively. But she also knew that the same things encountered in a different situation with a different outcome would not have been read as signals at all. They were ambiguous. The flatness of a few evenings could mean many things. The quieter week could mean many things. In the absence of the ending, she would not have weighted them the way she was weighting them now. And this is the particular trap of the retrospective search for the missed signal. Everything looks like a signal in hindsight. The brain presented with an outcome will work backwards to find the evidence that should have predicted it. And it almost always finds something because early relationships are just full of ambiguous moments. And ambiguous moments can be weighted any number of ways, depending on what frame you're applying. The retrospective search tends to do two things. The first is that it produces a false sense of what was knowable in the moment. She hadn't missed obvious signs. She had encountered ambiguous information and interpreted them reasonably. That's not a failure of perception. That's just what early dating is. And the second is that it quietly shifts the question from what happened to what's wrong with my judgment. And that shift is where the real damage can occur, not from the ending itself, but from the meaning that gets built around it afterward. The story that starts forming often below the level of conscious awareness, and it says, I can't read these situations, I miss things, and I trust too easily, and my sense of what's real is unreliable. That story, if it solidifies, changes how you show up in the next situation. It makes you more guarded, more hypervigilant, more focused on watching for signals than on actually being present. And it turns dating into a detective exercise rather than a genuine experience of connection. That posture, scanning for danger rather than being genuinely open, tends to produce exactly the kind of guarded, slightly removed presence that makes real connection harder rather than more likely. There was something else that's worth examining in this situation, beyond what she could or could not have known. That something about Thomas that the ending itself revealed. He had not said anything when his experience had started shifting. He did not name the flatness in those evenings or raise whatever had been moving him toward this conclusion in any of the time before the phone call. And this meant that whatever she had been reading as a connection developing in real time, he had been experiencing it privately at a distance that she had not been given access to. Now, that's not a character indictment of Thomas, because some people just process internally. Some people need to arrive at their own conclusions before they're able to name it publicly. But it is information about the dynamic specifically, about what had and had not been happening between them in those 2 months. The connection that she had experienced had not been fully mutual, not at the level of depth that she had been in it. And that asymmetry, while painful to recognize, was clarifying in a way that the replay search for missed signals was not. She did not fail to see the signs. She had been seeing the real experience that she was having. Now his experience, which she did not have access to, had been different. What she wanted to take forward from this wasn't a resolution to watch more carefully or trust less. It was something quieter and more specific. A willingness to pay attention in future connections to the quality of mutuality, and not in an anxious or monitoring way, but genuinely, to whether the depth of connection felt shared, to whether both people seemed to be in the same experience rather than one person running ahead of the other in a dynamic where the gap wasn't visible. That attentiveness wasn't a defense against surprise endings, because nothing eliminates them entirely. Early relationships are just genuinely uncertain, and 2 people moving through one can arrive at very different places without either of them doing anything wrong. But staying connected to the actual quality of mutuality, rather than the story that she was building about where things were going, was the thing that would give her the clearest read available. Not a guarantee, but a clearer read. And she decided that was enough to work with. Now, what this episode points to is the specific disorientation of a surprise ending, and the more important question of what it's actually worth understanding afterward versus what it's not. And if that's landing, I want to invite you to 2 places. The first is the free workshop, where I go deeper into how to read early connections more clearly, not to protect yourself from surprise, but to stay genuinely grounded in what's actually there. And you can find more in the show notes. And if you want to continue this in the private podcast, where I go into how to process a surprise ending without it becoming a story about your worth or your judgment, that continuation is waiting for you also in the show notes. This conversation is complete as it is. I'm really glad you're here. Stay steady and aligned with the relationship that you want.